Man, you got to be 100% of the time. You got to be on.
I guess I'll try to muster up. The enthusiasm on episode 248 of the In the Tank podcast. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things here, miscellaneous stuff, CHAZ, maybe some Google, woke businesses. I don't know, maybe socialism. See if we get around to it. Episode 248 of the In the Tank podcast. I am Donald Kendal, your host, as always. Joining me today, I have got Justin Haskins, editorial executive at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing very well, Donald. Nicely done on the title. You managed to butcher both my current and former titles. That's great. Well done.
Also joining us, we've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir? Got that one right.
Very well. Very good. I'm doing okay. I'm just watching the Maoist Cultural Revolution take place right before our eyes. A lot faster than I thought it would happen.
Great. That's fantastic. And in the corner over there, we have Andy Singer, producer extraordinaire. How are you, good sir? Fantastic. All right. So, guys, I want to get to my favorite topic of the last week, which is CHAZ, or CHOP, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or the Seattle Autonomous Zone, or the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. So apparently they can't even get their names straight.
Why did they change the name? Do we know?
I think it was some legal. I'm sure there's some legal part for it. I think it's called. Wasn't it called Capitol Hill Ongoing Protest? Isn't that what it was called? So that it was like not a permanent thing. So that I don't know. That's what I heard, but they can't keep their act together. So yeah, maybe name something.
Thing. I mean, it doesn't seem like they care about any of the laws, so I can't imagine it's a legal thing. But
yeah. Well, look, occupying whole city streets, city blocks, taking over police stations and businesses, that's fine. But copyright law, we take that very seriously. We are very serious. There's some law office or something with the same name. So we got to back off on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was spray painted. That sentiment was spray painted onto the wall of one of the businesses.
Yeah.
And CHOP, not to be confused with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So there's a copyright infringement there. So they might have to change that.
Can't be too
all right,
careful.
so
that's a shame. Yeah, that's a shame.
So I promised an update. So I don't know. I mean, we at the end of last episode we said over under, is it going to survive past Monday? And I guess CHAZ, as we were referring to it, did not. I guess technically didn't, because they renamed it over the weekend to CHOP. So I don't know how we're going to determine who won that bet. But I did promise that I was going to give an update. So if anyone's been like Googling it or going on Twitter or whatever and looking it up, the thing that's kind of gotten the most attention about it is their pathetic farm. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of this, Andy. You could try to pull it up or whatever while I'm talking about it. But basically, there's all these absolutely pathetic pictures of them laying down like cardboard in the middle of like the park that's in that area, putting topsoil down, and then literally just putting like potted plants in it. Like, it honestly looks like it was made by like a group of first graders. And it got mocked like viciously online, just absolutely viciously torn apart online. So here's some of it right here. It's an absolute joke. Our audio listeners will just have to imagine, it. People are watching on YouTube. You could see it. Again, it got mocked so viciously that they seem to have doubled down on trying to make this an actual functioning farm. So they're organizing, they're putting more effort into it, and now it looks like it was put together by a group of third graders.
Wait a minute. I'm confused. What is this thing? What is it?
That's supposedly a farm. That's a
farm.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. So it's just dirt on the street, right?
No. They have like a little park. There's grass. They put down cardboard.
Yeah.
So that the grass doesn't grow through the soil. And then they put topsoil down.
Yeah. So they're growing the plan is to grow their own food.
Yeah. They want to be autonomous.
But come on. Let's be honest. The only thing they care about growing is weed, right? I mean, they don't want to eat, and they're not gonna eat any of that stuff. I mean, what do they know how farming works? Do they know that it takes like 2 months to start getting to start making tomatoes? I mean, geez, it's ridiculous. What a joke.
Yeah, I want to know what they're growing. I think we should ask.
The plants are so pathetic and small, you can't even tell what they are. That's what's so funny. It's so well organized too. I mean, golly.
This picture right here was when a homeless guy took over the farm and tried to make his own autonomous zone inside the autonomous zone.
He looks like he's doing the Darth Maul double lightsaber dance going on right there. It's pretty funny.
This is unbelievable. Did I tell you guys that I went to Seattle? I went to Seattle this past year for the first time in my life.
You and I, we both went.
Oh, that's right. Well, we went together, but I went with my wife too, separately. Because you and I, we didn't actually hang out in Seattle. We would have been burned at the stake if we had gone there. You and I were hanging out like in the suburbs with all the rich Republicans or whatever. But in Seattle itself, Seattle is, first of all, it's a beautiful place. It's incredibly beautiful. I mean, Washington State is maybe the most beautiful place in America. I loved it. I thought it was so incredibly beautiful. However, it is kind of a freak show, without question. It is not surprising, having been there recently. When you go and you see this now, it's not surprising that this happened. Not at all. I mean, it seemed like a tinderbox waiting for something.
So when we were going to go to Seattle, we had like a speech that we were doing, and I had some family members who were like, "Oh, be careful! It's pretty crazy out there." And I'm just like, it's just kind of weird. Like, I know there's weird people, but whatever. But now after seeing this, I'm like, wow, we made it out with like our skin. That's like a good thing. We should be celebrating.
Yeah.
So reports are that the area is rife with theft. There's actually on Reddit, there's the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone subreddit. And there's like stories about people's like tents being looted and, their laptops being stolen and whatever. Drug use, general filth. I don't think it rivals like the streets of San Francisco quite yet, but these are the reports that you see if you're going on Twitter and searching it. So there's descriptions of the autonomous zone, usually coming from the right side of the aisle, that paint it as a communist occupied city where armed anarchists and proto-warlords extort local businesses for money. Whereas the left, progressives, this is coming from an article from Politico, progressives have highlighted elements of the area that much more accurately reflect the on-the-ground activities, discussing the hippie block party vibe and talking about how local activists are offering everything from free snacks and clothing to teach-ins on Marxism and harm reduction clinics. So MSNBC, there was a clip that they would like you to believe that it's a street festival with a cause. So Jim, which is it?
I saw a picture of somebody who written in sidewalk chalk like a child that this is not a festival. So look, let's call this what it is. This is occupied territory. Marxists decided to arm up and take for themselves that which doesn't belong to them, which is 6 city blocks of property owned by others, and decided to trash it and set up their own autonomous zone, basically their own country. They consider themselves not subject to the laws of the United States. There's signs out front that say you are leaving the United States. And those businesses, if you can see pictures, they're very easy to find, or videos on YouTube or Twitter of the destruction of the storefronts that are there, the graffiti and the smashed up things, and the things are boarded up, garbage everywhere. This all happened just in a matter of weeks. This is absolutely unacceptable. And, Seattle is a weird place. It's not as weird as Portland, which has its own weird issues. But the governor and the mayor of that, and the governor, Jay Inslee, and the Mayor Jennifer, I think she calls herself, that's her Twitter handle, have allowed Marxist anarchists to just seize property that belongs to normally tax-paying citizens. If I own a business in that autonomous zone or anywhere near it, I'm closing up shop. It's already probably closed because of coronavirus anyway, and I'm never coming back. If they think that the city is just going to recover from this, that maybe in another month or maybe when the summer ends and it starts getting a little colder and rainier, that people start to break up and go home. The absolute lack of order or any concern whatsoever for the people who live there that were in America a couple of weeks ago, or the people who own businesses there and have no interest at all in protecting what they own and just giving it up to these lunatics. These people should never, ever come back. A lot of businesses in Seattle should never, ever come back. And that's what's going to be wrought from this. This is absolutely unacceptable. I said it 2 weeks ago. This is what the National Guard is for. You line them up, you march them through, and you get all that scum out of there, because this should not be happening in America. Again, can you imagine if extreme right wingers had just taken property of their own and decided we are no longer the subject of the United States laws? What would happen then? As I said a couple of weeks ago, it would be Waco in about 20 minutes. And yet this has been going on for weeks and weeks, and it's funny. Look at their stupid garden that they consider a farm. They think they're going to eat from that. They're extorting people. They're stealing from people. Not to mention the land. They're basically extorting the business owners to pay them to sustain themselves. This is, I just marvel at it. This should not be happening in the United States of America.
So, Justin, you weren't on last week when we talked about this. What are your thoughts?
I think it's hilarious. And the reason I think it's really funny is because it is just objectively hilarious. These people are complete lunatics, but I think it's important for us, and obviously Marxist lunatics, but I think it's actually important for America to see just how crazy some of these people are, and what just a circus freak show it is sometimes. I think it actually is really beneficial because I think that there's a tendency for people to want to believe that, for the most part, we're all sort of just the same and we just have different ideas about how to get to the same solutions. And I think for maybe 80% of America, that's true. But then there are these fringe groups. And on the left, this is what the fringe groups look like, that are just like totally crazy, like just completely off the wall, circus level crazy. And I think when you see this kind of thing, it's important to remember that this group does exist and that they're actually driving a lot of the politics on the left. And that's important to remember. Like when you hear Democratic Socialists of America and stuff like that, like a lot of those people are also out in the street in Seattle right now. Like they're not, it's a fringe group, yes, but it's a much larger proportion of the political left than a lot of people want to believe. So anytime I get to, see this kind of thing happen, I find it hilarious. I find it entertaining. I know it's not entertaining if you're the business owner or whatever who's lost their business. I get that, but people need to understand this really is how these people think, and that they are completely bat crap crazy. And you need to remind people of that sometimes, I think.
So I want to pivot quickly to another topic. I might circle back to this. I reserve the right to circle back to this. But I do want to pivot to something that's going on, a wave of changes in the corporate world. Okay. So headlining this story is Aunt Jemima, having served as the mascot for a pancake mix since 1889. Aunt Jemima is stepping down from the syrup bottle. Also being disappeared from the shelves is Uncle Ben and Mrs. Butterworth. There are several other mascots or brands that are considering making changes. So, Jim, is this corporate pandering, or is this just them catching up with the times?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think the result is actually kind of strange here. You're removing African American mascots from, or spokespeople from the grocery store shelves. You are, I guess there used to be the talk about decolonizing your bookshelf. So maybe we're decolonizing the grocery store shelves. I don't know. But it is a lot of pandering. The one that gets me is Mrs. Butterworth's. Now, to me, Mrs. Butterworth's is just a fat grandma shaped bottle that has my favorite syrup in it. I never assigned any race or ethnicity to Mrs. Butterworth's. So that one I don't even get. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, you know what? I think I'm missing something too, because I was looking that up. And I was like, I always thought like I always pictured her like as my grandma. Like I never really gave like thought of her as like a white lady or a black lady. I actually Googled, is Mrs. Butterworth black, like today in Google. Like I never thought I would have to write that sentence into a search engine, but that's the times that we're in now. Yeah, Jim, I don't know. I thought you were going to get a little bit more heated over that one.
Well, I mean, look, do I have a real emotional investment in the brand Aunt Jemima for pancakes? No. I mean, Uncle Ben's rice. Sure. I mean, maybe they'll replace it with Uncle Ben from Spider-Man or something, but I guess they're going to retire those brands. But I just find it strange that everything is happening so quickly. I don't mean to overstate it. As I said, kind of in the beginning as a half joke, that we're undergoing a cultural revolution right now, a Maoist style cultural revolution where all of the things in the past have to be destroyed so you can build a new glorious future. Justin knows all this backwards and forwards, and this is the way it happened in China. And it wasn't even that long ago that this happened in China. And it seems a little silly and maybe kind of funny that, we're suddenly obsessed or upset about the brand of a pancake mix or a pancake syrup or some rice. But it's all part and parcel of this. Is all part of all these statues being torn down, and not just the Confederate generals and soldiers statues around the South, but George Washington's statue being torn down, having an American flag put on his head, and then that set on fire. I mean, this is, I don't mean to overstate it, but I don't think a lot of this is all that funny. I don't think it's really funny to see your entire country in unrest everywhere. And the silliness and the extremism seems to have no limits. It seems to go everywhere. And everything that just seemed normal and not controversial, literally 20 minutes ago, is suddenly the biggest thing in the world. And that has to go too. I just keep wondering, when is this going to end? When is somebody going to stand up and say, that's enough? You're not doing that. I'm actually going to protect this statue of George Washington because he's the father of this country, the most free and tolerant country, multi-ethnic country in the history of civilization. And somebody has to say stop. All right. Now, I don't care if it doesn't stop at Aunt Jemima or Aunt Jemima pancakes or Uncle Ben rice or even Mrs. Butterworth, but it has to stop somewhere. And I just don't see it even slowing down. And to me, that's not funny. That's troublesome.
So, Jim,
yeah, I'm really bringing it down. I apologize.
No. I want to thank you. I want to thank you because you reacted to these things exactly how I expected you to.
Well, you push my buttons, but what am I going to do?
So let me give you a little more context. The actual plan of this episode is this discussion that we're about to have. Forget about all the other stuff that I mentioned at the top of the episode. Last week, when we were talking about CHAZ, it was just you and me, and I wanted to make a big old joke about it. I thought it was hilarious, all of these things, super funny, and then you just like sucked the funny out of it. Like, we have got to take this so seriously. So then, obviously, I called Justin up after the episode, like, dude, you left me with Jim. He sucked the funny out of it. I wanted to have a good old time talking about CHAZ and their terrible co-op and their farming and the warlord guy that took over and all of this stuff. And we started to talk about just, I don't know, Justin, how should we get into this conversation?
So I think why this is interesting for a variety of reasons, but I think maybe the biggest reason for me is I've noticed, and Donald noticed this too, and we confirmed this with a very unscientific poll that was conducted later on, that there seems to be a generational gap that exists in the way that people are reacting to these kinds of stories. And so for people like me and for people like Donnie and other people our age, we don't seem to care as much about these things as older people do. And by older people, I don't mean old people. I'm not saying that, Jim. But I am saying older people. I think there comes a cutoff. I don't exactly know where it is. Maybe it's like 40 or something. But there's a cutoff where it seems like older generations of conservatives, not people in general, but conservatives and maybe some moderates, are really, really mad about these kinds of things. And it's like a cultural revolution and all of this stuff. But then younger people don't really seem to care that much about it, even conservative people. And that was something that Donnie and I, we we wanted to dig into that and figure out why that exists.
Yeah, we have.
Why is there such a different emotional? Because I don't necessarily disagree with your arguments, but I just don't care. Like, it's just emotionally, I don't care. So why is that? Why don't I care? Why do you care so much and I don't care?
We have some theories, but we don't want to put the theories out there yet. We just kind of want to explore this idea. So as Justin mentioned, we did do an unscientific poll. I polled several of the younger people in the office, as well as a bunch of friends of mine, about a variety of topics. And just, I wanted to give you a 1 to 10 of like your outrageometer. Okay. When I present you with these scenarios. So I talked to, I gave Aunt Jemima. The average was a 2.1. CHAZ was a 4.7. But on the other hand, like the calls to repeal the Second Amendment, that's a 9.4. And like unlimited money printing and the national debt being like $30 trillion or whatever it is an 8.4. So it confirmed our suspicion that younger people don't care about some of these things that you were heated about versus, the things that, like, I think we can all agree we should all be heated about. So can you maybe offer your own insight on why you think that, like, you're an 8 across the board on all of these topics?
Well, I guess that's kind of my personality, because I would be an 8 across the board on all the other things that your generation or younger were upset about. I mean, look, I'm what's nice about this podcast is I guess a lot of people are getting everything they want. If you think CHOP is funny, if you think, this cultural revolution that is happening before us, tearing down our history, having no respect for it, and having our leaders just let it happen. If you think that that's not funny or cool, well, then good. Then you have that on this podcast. But if you're like me, Generation X person who, was a Cold War kid who knows people who lived in behind the Iron Curtain and knows what's happening, you talk to those people and they see what's happening in this country right now, and they see a lot of things that are familiar to them, and it worries them. And so, yeah, I mean, our freedoms are a lot more fragile than you think. And maybe it's age and experience. Maybe it's not a generational thing. Maybe if I was in my 20s or 30s, instead of being 49 years old, I might have a different attitude for this, because I would think, well, I got another 60 years to save this country. Well, when you're 50 or you're 60, you realize my contributions to try to save this country, the country that I love, the country that I used to live in, my time is getting short. Maybe that's a big part of it. I don't know. But I just don't think it's very funny to see this continually going on and nobody doing anything to stop it. That's in a position of power. The cops let it happen. The politicians let it happen. And no, I just don't think that's a very good thing for this country, because, well, it just isn't. I mean, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in the foundation of this country, watching all this happen before your eyes can be quite angering and disappointing and really saddening.
But don't you see how, like, it could be almost cannibalizing of the more important things? Where, like, okay, so for example, I'm like, yesterday, Justin and I had this phone call about this concept of 21st century socialism and these ideas of overhauling capitalism and to basically serve out this idea of the governments or some supra government, like being able to shift society and the economy or whatever. A really heavy conversation that we had. And I go back to my desk and I'm working on something, and I flip on like some podcast or whatever. And it was a very well-known conservative talking head type person. And they were like as equally heated, like similar to how enthusiastic Justin and I were just talking about this big important thing. They were equally heated about Aunt Jemima being taken off syrup. And I just thought, like, if you're going to have that same level of outrage over both of these things, doesn't that kind of just make the other one seem just as important as Aunt Jemima being taken off syrup?
I don't care about Aunt Jemima being taken off syrup, frankly. I mean, I think it's part of a larger tearing down of things in this country, because it's part of a strategy to erase your history on a micro level that is not really that important, like Aunt Jemima pancake mix or Uncle Ben's rice. But it's part of the strategy of the goals of the radical leftists that seem to be in ascendancy in this country to tear it all down. I mean, there's nothing. That's the thing about a totalitarian regime. There is nothing too small There is nothing too small for them not to care about and worry about and get rid of. That's the thing that troubles me. I mean, watch a movie, and I'm going to watch it again this weekend, I think, the movie The Lives of Others, which The Lives of Others is a German film. It's subtitled, and it's about the Stasi in East Germany. And actually, I was just remembering this morning, thinking about it, that even the people that the Stasi were spying on were the elites, the communists, the people that were in the in crowd. And even they were being spied on and listened to and reported on and having their lives ruined. So this kind of thing doesn't stop. That's the thing that troubles me. It's not so much that I care. I don't care about Aunt Jemima pancake mix. I really don't. What I care about is that it is a part of what's happening in this country where there is nothing. There is absolutely nothing that is too small to get beyond their notice that also has to be changed. That to me is not good. That's not good for a culture, because that means it's all open to being torn down. There's no stop to it.
So, Justin, feel free to jump in here, but I almost think that there's like just a difference of tactics, I guess I would say, because obviously we thought the CHAZ thing was important enough to talk about. You took a more outraged point of view on talking about that, whereas I was resorting to just kind of ridicule. And for like a younger generation, I think that ridiculing it and making it into a complete joke is a more effective tactic on dealing with this particular scenario.
So I think you could. I think that's valid. I think that for younger people, that's a tactic that works. I think maybe a little bit better than it does with older people. But I think that there's something else going on here too, because I think it's more than just a It's not even just a tactic, because before there's even a intellectual before you even get to the point where you're thinking about tactics, or you just the natural reaction that I have, and the natural reaction that Donald has, and the natural reaction that most young people I know has, and it's confirmed by this poll, is that it just doesn't really matter all that much, and they don't feel emotionally invested in it. Whereas I think that Jim and other people, I think there's a lot of people who, and Jim, I don't think it's just you. I think it is a generational thing. I don't think it's just you as an individual, because everybody I know who, again, there's some sort of age cutoff where it's like everybody older than this who's a conservative gets really upset about sort of the cultural aspects of the things that you were just talking about. And I think agrees with you. I think my theory is, and I think you presented an interesting one. Your theory was, at least in part, maybe older people, because they have less time left, think of this as like, well, I care about my country. I want to fix my country. And I see that my opportunity to impact that, is not, I don't have 50 years left, and so that could very well be. But my theory is this: I believe that fundamentally our experiences as conservatives are so radically different in how we've lived in America. And our understanding of what America is so radically different, not in the sense of what we would ideally like it to be. We agree on that. But what it is so radically different that I don't get emotionally upset over these things happening. And here's why. You look at all of the stuff that's going on and you say, this is America is falling apart and it's being hijacked and all of this. And I look at that and say, it's always been hijacked. So as long as I've lived on this planet, it's been hijacked. For me, it's almost like you're losing something that I never had. I never had the America that you're afraid of losing. It never existed. I grew up in the liberal Northeast, surrounded by people who derided everything that I ever believed, who routinely referred to, George Washington as a racist and a horrible person, and on and on and on. So for me, this is just like, yeah, of course, this is what people think. Of course, this is what they're going to do. They've been telling me this my whole life, that this is what they were going to do. So am I surprised that they're doing it? No. I look at it and I think this is completely, it's almost like I'm living in, to some extent, like a dark comedy, right? Where I know how tragic it is, but I can't help but think it's funny. It's funny because it's ridiculous, and I know it's ridiculous, and these people who are taking over parts of Seattle are ridiculous, but I've inherited this crazy world. And the only way for us to actually fix it, in my opinion, is not to have these cultural battles. We lost the cultural battles. That's over, man. Give up. It's gone. It's done. We've lost America. The America that you remember, Jim, when you were a kid is dead. It is dead. It is gone. The only way we're ever going to repair that is to make big, gigantic structural changes to all sorts of different things like education and all things you agree with me on. The difference is I think we've already lost the battle you are worried that we're losing. And I think the only way we're ever going to fix it is by accepting that we lost and then rebuilding, rather than say, we got to cling on to these little scraps of hope that we've got left. It's dead. It's over. There's too many people who are my age that have given up on freedom because they've been indoctrinated to believe something is, and that doesn't mean we can't save America. We can save America, but we can't, but not by trying to fight these little incremental battles. It's got to be big, gigantic, structural, massive changes. And all these other little things to me are just distractions to those big things that need to happen. And actually, in a lot of ways, I think make us look bad because we're talking past, when you talk about all of this crazy cultural Marxism and all of it, you're so far talking past most people in my generation. They can't even begin to understand what you're talking about. They don't even know who Mao is, so they don't care about any of that. We have to focus, I think, on more foundational, bigger structural changes. And you don't disagree with me, I know, but I still think that you care about these other things because I don't think you and a lot of people who are your age or older have admitted what I think is true because I've lived it for so long. It's all I know. I think that's where we're at. I think we have two sort of different realities that we're living in a sense. And that's why I think older people are so upset about it and younger people are just like, yeah, we're in the minority. Most people our age don't agree with us. They don't think we're right about anything. They like, so what? It's almost like we're countercultural and you're still not countercultural. You're still like, I remember a time when most people thought like me. It's like, I don't ever remember that time. So I'm okay with that. Like, you know what I'm saying? I really think that there's something to this. And I think that's where the real root of the difference is.
So I'm the Japanese soldier that was, hiding in a cave on an island somewhere and comes out in 1962 and still thinks it's World War II and comes out with his gun or something like that, right?
Well, no, because if you were by yourself, I would say yes. But the difference is, I think there's a whole generation of, I think most conservatives, because I think most conservatives numerically are older, if you're just going to look at the numbers, I think most conservatives who are older are totally agree with you. I actually think they totally agree with you. I think there's a huge divide within conservatism amongst the people who are, let's say over 40 and those who are under 40. And that's that's not a scientific cutoff, obviously, but I think I really think there's a big difference there. So it's not like you're just, the one guy who feels this way. I think most people feel that way. I think most conservatives feel like you feel. I think I'm in the minority, relatively speaking, but I think most younger people feel the way that I feel.
But so you say that we need a big structural change from our way, right? We can't be worrying about these little battles. And when you were talking about that, why I concentrate, why I think these little things, what you call little things, tearing down George Washington statue and all that stuff, why I think it's important is that very well, Justin, that the Marxists have done a very slow and long march through our institutions. And so they've done it little by little by little by little. And now they see their moment and they're really accelerating. And so, yeah, I'm concentrating on the little things because it reminds me of all the little things they had done before maybe you were too young to pay attention to these things. And now I see it really accelerating. I think we should be able to agree that somebody in authority needs to say, stop. Don't tear down that statue of George Washington. Don't take over 6 city blocks that don't belong to you. We have people in power that have, you may have given up. You may have just thrown your hands up. Okay, it's funny, whatever. But our elected officials who are of my generation for the most part or older should not be just ceding all of this to the radicals and then waiting for this time when we can just renew America again and get people, embracing the principles upon which this great free country was founded. I worry about the little stuff because it's just a continuation of the little stuff that's been happening at different paces for the last 40 years.
Right. And I get that. I totally get that. But the reason why I think that the battle is over, this part of the battle is over, is because you and, talking heads on cable news and all these people complaining about this is not ever going to break through to the people who you want to break through to. It isn't going to work. It's such a distorted way of looking at the world, and it is so ingrained in younger people that it really is a waste of time, I think, in a lot of ways, because it just isn't going to happen. No matter how much you yell about it, no matter how much facts or information you throw, it is not going to matter.
So just let them run wild. So just let them run. Just let the Marxist leftists run wild.
No, I would say that you guys are letting the Marxist left run wild, and that's what you guys have been doing for your whole life, Jim.
Oh, I love it.
Your whole life. Well, no, not you. Your generation. I mean, let me ask you a question. Would you agree that many of these problems wouldn't exist if we had created school choice 40 years ago?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
That's a great thing.
Now 40
years ago, I was 10 years old. I was not in a position to make that happen.
Yeah, no, I understand. But it hasn't happened over the last 40 years, right?
Well, not
in any sort of a real sense, right? So my question is, are there conservatives? Are there states out there that have been run by conservatives over the past 40 years that could have made that change if they wanted to?
Absolutely.
Okay, so why didn't they make that change?
We're reaping the we're reaping the crops of that, and they're a lot better than the crops that are in CHOP.
That's my point. In other words, for 40 years, conservatives did have an opportunity to fix the problem, and they didn't, because for 40 years they were focusing on all these other little tiny battles instead of saying, you know what, these tiny little battles, who cares whether we win this tiny little battle, because in the end we're going to lose the war unless we focus on the big structural changes. And they never did. They never bothered. If every day on talk radio all you ever heard was, we have to get rid of the current school system, and that drum was banged every single day for 40 years, I guarantee you it would be gone by now. But it's not, because that didn't happen, and instead we focused on all these other little things, and we didn't focus on the things that I think actually mattered.
So can I present an analogy here, and then Justin, you could tell me if I'm off base with my analogy. But just like, imagine like a river like flowing down, and it's all the water is bad. You don't want the water. The river is flowing down, and the little battles are like, Jim, like at the where the water is all letting out with like a bale of water or like a bucket. And it's just trying to shovel the bucket loads of water out. And what you're arguing is that we should be concentrated on creating the dam to stop that flow of Marxism in the first place.
Right.
We should be focusing on the dam, not the buckets, the bailing at the end of the river.
And I would argue that by bailing the water out with the bucket, you're wasting resources on something that could be used to build the dam. So that analogy works. Yeah, I think that's exactly my point. Yes. Okay. We are, instead of focusing on we have spent way too much time as a movement talking about things that ultimately would not solve the larger overarching source problem. And because we wasted all that energy over 40 years, you're right, just us on this podcast, this one day doesn't matter. But every day, add up every minute spent by every conservative talking about all of these issues. And now you have wasted a massive amount of time and resources on something that in the grand scheme of things would never have solved the problem anyway.
Jim, care to respond to that concept?
No, I don't care to respond to that specifically. I mean, I actually responded that, that I'm at the bottom of a raging river with a bucket thinking I'm going to be saving the world with that bucket. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I would also add that it was not my generation, Generation X, that has been in power for the last 40 years. It's been the boomers. So maybe we should have Ed Hudgens on here, who I believe is a genuine baby boomer, to ask him to account for his generation for letting school choice wither on the vine for 40 years and, not reining in spending. I was a young man during the Republican Revolution of 1994, and there was the contract with America, and they said, we're going to have a balanced budget, we're going to do all these things, and none of those things happened. And so, Generation X is considered a very cynical generation, and we have good reason for that. And it's the reason that Justin is very cynical about politics and about the people that, that say they run this country, is that they can't be counted on to stand for principle, that they're always giving in to self-interest, to their political interests. Conservatives, when they get in power, are cowed by the media to basically just give in to whatever the left wants. Even if they only give halfway, the left knows, they gave us halfway, we're going to get the other half in about 5 years, and then they get it. And then we move on to the next. That's what I mean about the incrementalism. I've been a conservative and a libertarian my whole adult life. I've cared about these issues. I've written about these issues. I've spoken about these issues. I've tried to rally friends about these issues, and we all agree on them. And yet we watch the dominant culture just continue to move left and to promote leftism. Our Hollywood does it. Our media does it. So maybe I am the guy with the bucket at the bottom of the stream of the rushing water, but I feel like I can do nothing else. That's where I'm standing. This is what's coming at me. And that's the weapon I have at my disposal. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm sorry.
So I get that. I get that. Obviously a person of limited resources, what can they do? Like, if your Twitter account is that bucket, it's not like you're going to be solving school choice by just constantly talking about that or whatever.
That's Justin's job.
But just coming from
his blue check mark, he'll fix school choice with his blue check mark on Twitter. Get to it.
But just but like even coming from like your journalist background, like why is it that the limited amount of hours on like Fox News and other media or whatever, dang it, Jim, is used their limited time on those outlets are used to talk about these things that we think are kind of the more frivolous stuff, and instead of talking, just beating the drum on trying to push back against the ridiculous national debt, seemingly unlimited money printing, the ongoing modern monetary theory that's ushering in socialism, and protecting things that are as foundational to the United States as like the Second Amendment.
Let me put it in. Let me talk about the most influential conservative media magnate of the last 100 years, and that's Rush Limbaugh. I mean, he came on the scene with the national radio show in 1988. I remember, he wasn't very nationally syndicated very far. I remember first listening to him, finding him when he was played repeats of his program on Saturday afternoons while I was delivering pizza as an 18-year-old. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. Now, Justin, if Rush Limbaugh spent every day hammering on school choice every day, how long do you think his radio show would have lasted?
Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer?
Very good. I mean, you have to have a show that people want to listen to. I mean, that's one of the things about propaganda and the left, is that they can kind of get away with what they want, but people won't listen to it. They do tune it out. Fox gets ratings because they talk about what's hot right now. Rush Limbaugh created modern talk radio because he had an open field in front of him and did nothing but criticize the liberal establishment in media, in politics, and in culture. And he created a media empire that a lot of people are lords of in this empire for themselves as well. So, there has been a lot. Can you even imagine a world without talk radio, without podcasts now, without conservative YouTube channels, and without Fox News? It would be. I shudder to think that there's no alternative but to the leftist narrative and agenda that has been dominating our culture. So even with these tiny little carve-outs for people who are not on the left to express themselves and to share ideas and to promote smart, liberty-minded, free market ideas, we've still lost. We've still lost the culture war, as you said, Justin. That makes me sad, but you can't say we didn't try.
Well, I'm curious for Justin's response to that, because earlier when we were talking about all this, I brought up the fact that media outlets like, Fox News, where they have to talk about what's the outrage du jour, they're doing it for ratings purposes. Like, oh, we're going to talk about this just so we're not talking about the same thing every day. And for entertainment's sake, we have to be outraged about it. So today we're going to be outraged about what's today? Aunt Jemima. So, I mean, we did talk about this a little bit, so I'm curious about your response, Justin.
Yeah, I think that you obviously have to hit on new things. Otherwise, it gets stale. I understand that. But all the times that we hear people talk about tearing down George Washington statues, talking about Aunt Jemima, blah, 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 all these things, How many times do you hear them tie that to school choice? Almost never. Almost never. So we're outraged all the time, and then we don't even provide the reason for why this thing is supposedly happening. See, so it's not just, well, you can't just talk about, some boring policy over and over and over again. It's why can't you tie that policy to all of the problems that you're talking about? You can. They don't. And if Rush Limbaugh had done that for 20 years, I bet you anything that more things would have happened in our direction. And the truth is, on certain issues, they have done that. There's certain things that conservatives are really riled up about. But this isn't one of them. And the proof of that is even in the places where you have conservatives running everything, they don't have school choice. How does that make any sense? It's not just, well, we've lost all these cultural. Well, how do you explain not having universal school choice in Montana? How do you explain that? Other than the leaders of the conservative movement have not made an effort to try to explain to people in Montana why that is the key issue. They all know that that's the key issue in some way, but it's never presented to them on a daily basis saying, look, this is the problem. This is what we have to fix. The Supreme Court you hear about that all the time. That's always been a thing. It's a big rallying cry for the right? We got to make sure we have the right Supreme Court justices in there, right? We hear that all the time, and it's true. But really, you could argue that the school choice thing is even bigger than the Supreme Court justice thing in the long run, because those kids grow up to become voters who vote for presidents who put in Supreme Court justices, right? That's the root source of all the problems. And yet it's never the focus. It's never the reason. There's never a big, massive movement to fix that problem, ever. That to me is the real issue, is that we don't focus on that. That is not, and I mean, we don't talk about immigration here. We're not getting into immigration or anything like that, taking a position one way or the other, but everyone can admit that is a major issue that we hear about all the time, and that's blamed or credited for all sorts of different things. But we don't ever hear anyone talk about school choice. It's just not an issue. Even for Donald Trump, it's not an issue. Even though he put somebody in as Secretary of Education, is a big supporter of school choice, they chose not to make that a major issue. It's never a major issue, even though it's the root cause of all of our problems. And if you contrast that with the left won incremental battles over culture and everything else. That's true. But while they were doing that, were making massive institutional changes across the board, including in education. They didn't used to control education. It wasn't Marxist running education, in the 1950s and 40s. That wasn't how it worked. They took them a long time. They put lots of money, lots of effort, lots of time into big campaigns to get left-wing people to go into the school system. And we've never done that on the right, ever. So I do think that there is a degree of responsibility among people who are older, but really all of the conservative movement, to not fix that problem without question. I think that we have to look inwardly and say, well, this is the root problem here, and we didn't really do anything to try to fix it, even in the places where we did have control of things. And boomers are more responsible for it than other generations, but really every generation is responsible for it, because we don't have any big, massive movement to try to fix that problem. It is never presented as the key problem that needs to be fixed, even though it really, in most ways, is.
Well, there is a place for, this is called the In the Tank podcast, and we are a think tank at the Heartland Institute. And you know how much work we've done on school reform. It was one of the big topics of interest of our founding president, Joe Bast. And there have been victories on a smaller scale in places for school choice, mostly pilot programs. You can look at Wisconsin. Their school choice programs up there have been very successful. They've been proven successful. Statistics show they're successful. The real failure is getting other states, of course, to copy those models and to expand them in their own states. There's always a resistance. Now, this ties into who took over our education system. Marxists. Who controls our education system? Teachers' unions. What do teachers' unions want less than anything else in the entire world, even than a meteor striking the earth? It is school choice, because it weakens their power. And so the teachers unions have taken over public school in this country so that you can't have any real structural change The schools are there really for the they're not there to educate children. There was a famous quote from a school board member. It's like, I'll start caring about the students when they vote, right? And so that's where we are right now. And there needs to be a lot more structural change. But there have been think tanks out there, including the Heartland Institute, that do have some victories to brag about on school choice. We have that new program now, the school choice safety accounts, so kids can get out of dangerous schools. And yeah, there should be a lot of frustration on this, Justin, because as well as anybody that when you poll poor parents in inner cities, they are for school choice. They want more school choice. You set up a charter school, you have lines going around for blocks and waiting lists forever. Even with all of that supposed pressure on the system, it won't change because of the power of the unions. That's really, and that took a long time to bring up and to bring forward, but it's basically, that's the control of our public school systems now, unions, not politicians even.
So I agree that, so first of all, I agree totally that think tanks arguably, right? Think tanks on the right are the only people who have been pushing this, other than, parents, various parent organizations and homeschooling associations and things like that. It's them and think tanks, and that's pretty much it. And not even all think tanks. So there's no question about that. What we were talking about is more of the media and sort of the massive sort of conversation generally that's driven by the media. That was what at least that's what I was talking about. I totally agree with you about think tanks. No question about it. The reason why it hasn't happened is, you're right. The power of the teachers union surpasses the power of any other group involved in that conversation. But the reason for that isn't because the teachers unions are inherently more powerful. It's because the conversation is never the key focus. If all the voters, Republican voters in Texas 15 years ago said, we want school choice, and I don't care what the teachers unions want, they would have had school choice. But because that wasn't the main issue, it wasn't the primary driver, it wasn't the main topic of conversation, the teachers unions were able to control the conversation very quietly. And they've been doing that forever. There's been lots and lots of stuff that's been done, including by the Heartland Institute, on this topic. But one of the things you'll see is that the teachers unions have total control over local elections, whether it's like town council elections or other things like that, school board elections. They totally control that. They schedule these things to have, oftentimes to have votes on obscure times of the day, on Wednesday, it'd be like the third Wednesday of the month at 1:00. They've got to vote for a school board meeting, and the only people who show up are teachers union people. I mean, they have total control over it, but it's in large part because there is no massive awareness. There is no massive push from the media establishment, even on the right, to fix the problem. And that, to me, is really the issue. I think that if you did have that push, if the conversation was focused more on that, if we did try to twist most of this into, well, this problem wouldn't have existed if we had school choice, then all of a sudden, school choice would become the litmus test for if you're a real conservative or not. And right now, for politicians, it isn't, because most of them don't vote for school choice. And yet they get massive support from Republican voters, from conservative voters, et cetera. So it has to be driven from, there has to be a conversation, there has to be a movement that pushes it along. The system itself is never going to promote it without that push. And think tanks can do that, but they can only do so much of that. They have to have, the media has to be involved in it too, and they're not, because they're too busy waging every stupid little cultural battle they can possibly think of. It's the outrage of the day, instead of focusing on the big institutional problems that are driving these little tiny outrages that occur 1,000 times every year.
I think you touched on, there should be people out there in the street yelling, I want school choice. I want school choice. People on the right are very hard to organize in that way. And I think that's another, structural or constitutional, internal constitutional advantage that the left has, is that, leftists love that stuff. They love being led. They want the placards. They want the chants. They love marching down the street. Your average conservative is too busy living his life and doing his job and all that stuff. And so it's a real problem.
Explain the Tea Party movement. I mean, there
are exceptions, of course. There are exceptions to that, but and that took a lot to really generate, and then it petered out. But the left has been marching in the streets constantly for 60 years. They're always out there doing something. Look at the the funny Occupy Wall Street movement from a few years back.
I take that really seriously, Jim. Don't say funny.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, so the Occupy Wall Street people, like when Heartland's office was in Chicago, we were in the financial district, and we were just down the street from the Chicago Board of Trade, and the Occupy people stayed out there on that street, marching around in circles for months and months. It might have been 2 years. And people would always show up, and they'd have flyers, and they'd be organized. They be sure to come on down at 7:30, and then we'll have another shift of people coming at this other time. At its best, the Tea Party never did anything like that. The people on the right just don't, they don't tend to think as a collective. And that's a real disadvantage when it comes to street theater and putting public pressure on politicians to make change.
Well, speaking of the collective, I will make a little pitch for Justin and I's Stopping Socialism project, which if you're interested, you can follow us on Facebook, Stopping Socialism. You can also find videos that we make on YouTube, Stopping Socialism TV, where we tackle some of these bigger up the stream type problems like modern monetary theory and, just the Marxism that's kind of coming down the hill. And but then on the other hand, we still cover sillier topics. Like we just did a video recently about AOC and her origin story, and basically how she tried to get into the free market and make a book publishing company, and it failed miserably. So we did a little fun. It was just ridicule, we didn't get outraged about that. So we do talk about little things and big things. I just think that we do a little bit better of a job of balancing out our outrage on it. Andy, you found a video apparently of something. Explain this. What do you got for us?
Andy's muted.
Oh, you're muted? Okay, well, this is a Black Lives Matter co-founder explaining how they're neo-Marxists. Is that right?
I also think that it...
All right, let's play it. This is brand new, apparently.
I also think that it might... I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. And I think that what we really try to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk.
All right. Trained Marxists. They talk about how they want to disband the kind of nuclear family. That's kind of one of the foundational things of a free society. So that's the type of movements that we are up against. Gentlemen, we're running out of time. Any last words? You want to respond to that video? What's going on?
Well, that video points up what I was just talking about, that the left loves being organized. Name one. Has anyone ever met a conservative community organizer? They don't exist. They don't exist. They live for this stuff. Marxism depends on this kind of stuff. Always has, from 100 years ago in Russia to today.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think that's true. I think it is a huge disadvantage for people on the right. I would say that although there is always what the left loves to do, and what they've been doing recently with all of the chaos that's been going on, is they love to find some kind of legitimate concern, or a concern that people feel is legitimate, something that they're really passionate about, and then they love to find a way to use that to advance something that really had nothing to do whatsoever with that primary concern, and that is Marxism. And you see it over and over and over again, and you're seeing it now. It's the same kind of thing. So they take this idea. It's an important idea to a lot of people out there, very concerned, deeply passionate about it, and then they find a way to say, well, how can I fit Marxism into this? And how can I use this to advance Marxism? That is something that happens all the time on the left about all sorts of different issues, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. While also paying attention to all of the legitimate concerns that people have. And we need to address both. We need to be able to address both. We can't ignore legitimate concerns that people have. We can't ignore when people are feeling like the system isn't working for them. We need to point out why those problems exist and provide solutions to those problems, and I believe those solutions are free market solutions. But we also need to point out that there's something more going on as well, in addition to that. And I think that this is a perfect illustration of it.
Yeah, I mean, the leftists took over ecology and turned it into, to put Marxism into climate change. And we basically have the Green New Deal now, which is basically a Marxist socialist plan that has some green stuff in it. And I think it might be time to start asking people that are tweeting Black Lives Matter with a hashtag and support Black Lives Matter, start asking them if they also support Marxism, because that's where this is right now.
All right. I think we're going to end it there. Already above time, but I think this was a very interesting episode. I mean, the topics that I kind of fake put into that email, Jim, because I knew that we were going to talk about this instead. I think that, there's some interest there, Google and censoring whatever, but I think that this was actually a very productive episode. I think we got to some kind of root things here. And I was very happy with the way that this turned out. But I'm curious about, I'm sure that there's people listening to this that have very heated response to some of the things that were said. So feel free to email us inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us. That'd be fantastic. Find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter, which is a cesspool. Don't even worry about it. In the Tank Pod, at In the Tank Pod. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
They can send all of their hate mail to jlakely@heartland.org, jlakely, or follow me on Twitter, the real Justin Haskins, at Justin T. Haskins.
And Jim, same question. Where can the fine people find you?
I also like getting hate on Twitter, so you can do that at jlakely, and you can also go at HeartlandInst, and always check out heartland.org.
Andy, do you have a sound effect to carry us out at the end of this?
I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you next week.